There we go. Well, that's the magic bell. We'll get things started here, and we'll give folks a few minutes to join. But thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the June 1st installment of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force here in Takoma Park. Thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate your time, your commitment, and your service. To get things kicked off, Jacqueline, can you pull up the deck for us really quickly? To get things kicked off, you know how we do it. It's the going over the timeline and some of our housekeeping items to get us going. But there's not a meeting, so while Jacqueline's doing that, we are honored to have our councilwoman with us, Councilwoman Searcy. Thank you very much for joining us. We're honored to have our delegate with us, Delegate Moon. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you, your time and your service and your commitment to our communities. Next slide, please, Jacqueline. You all know the drill. Our purpose here is to reimagine public safety here in Takoma Park to make the community more safer, a more livable community for all residents, with an emphasis on racial inequities that exist in government and services evolving around public safety. So I am proud to be here with you all, and we're excited to keep going and moving forward. Quick overview of the timeline. We have made it to the June portion of the calendar. Wow, time has flown. Can you believe how quickly things have gone by? We are at the June 1st meeting. This is a task force meeting. Following that, next week we will have our subcommittee meeting, and then we'll have a listening session mid-June, followed by another subcommittee and a subcommittee and task force meeting. But we're in the final stretch here, and we are rounding off the final corners. Jacqueline, next slide, please. As we continue to have conversation here amongst the group, we want to increase public comment, and we want to ensure that we have an outlet for folks to provide their input on the process. So please share this link far and wide. As always, Jamal would drop it into the chat for you to tweet, Facebook, share with your networks, email, however you want to get that out there so folks can provide their public comment. That leads us in to our next section on the agenda. Jacqueline, you can take down the slide. Our community listening session. We had a community listening session last week on the 26th of May. We received ample feedback, and we had great conversation. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael, who's going to walk us through the feedback from the community listening session. Michael, you're up.
Thank you, Jevin. And a few task force members who weren't able to make the task force meeting asked if we could report out today on some of the highlights. We'll also drop in, sorry, that's my son in the background. We'll also drop in the link to the actual recording, as I know you'll all want to go back and watch that as well. But some of the highlights, it was a small but mighty night of feedback. We were welcomed by Councilmember Siemens, who kind of gave the charge to everyone around the task force, et cetera, and thanked everyone for showing up. We invited people to provide feedback multiple different ways per the task force's feedback. We gave people the option of coming on screen via video as well. I'd say about half of our participants wanted to do that. The others wanted to do chat, Q&A, and audio, and so we made it comfortable in whatever format they were asked. A highlight of some of the questions, we got a question around whether we sought any input from rank and file members of the Tacoma Police Department. We talked about how we had done 2 focus groups with police officers. We were asked if those focus group reports had been made public. They have not been made public at this point. We were asked to go into detail about how they were conducted, and we explained that notes were taken, but that we didn't record officers, much like we haven't been recording any of our focus groups. We've been capturing notes and writing thematic reports from them. And we talked about some of the things we heard on that. So that was a part of the discussion that night. It was also noted that task force members have been offered the opportunity to participate in ride-alongs with police officers, and that some of the members are scheduling those activities. We had some folks offer statements and questions, both of which were completely welcome. There was a statement around the task force's process and possible outcomes. As to process, there was a call for transparency and the opportunity for active community involvement beyond the term of this task force. The value and importance of these concerns, both to the image of the task force and the public and its deliberations, were emphasized, and some comparisons were drawn among this task force and others from around the region and around the country. It was noted that all of our task force meetings, even the subcommittee meetings, start with a public session, and we were able to direct attendees to where to find recordings of those. There was questions about how task force members receive public feedback. So we were able to explain that anything that's sent to that public feedback link that Jevin posted is batched and sent to task force members for going forward, and that public comment will continue to be welcome and encouraged throughout this. There was a question / statement posed around possible outcomes of the task force's work. A series of questions addressed everything from what kind and depth of information has been collected and analyzed? Has there been consideration of the social and economic context affecting public safety? Have we evaluated alternative responses to sensitive situations? And then questions about expectations regarding implementation. So after the recommendations go forward, what's expected in terms of implementation? There was a recommendation that the task force present a short, clear, concise, workable list of recommendations, and to keep in mind what might be funded immediately from the American Recovery Plan Act. There were some questions around whether this would be the last community listening session, and we were able to say no, there'll be another one scheduled for late June that'll be more recommendations based, where we'll have actual task force recommendations to unpack together. Last couple of things here, and I know this is pretty comprehensive, but I want to make sure it all gets to the full task force. There was a question, kind of comment offered by a community member focusing on incarceration and the concept that often gets lost, that in order to reduce the number of people in prison, it's necessary to arrest fewer people and incarcerate them for shorter periods of time. So let's not leave that out of our thinking. It was observed that this task force has an important role to play, as there's a clear effort to reduce encounters between the police and the public, and to evaluate whether police practices and procedures are written or habitual. The questions that were posed by this community member for consideration were who is getting arrested, who is getting ticketed, who is getting a warning, and how many punitive members can be done away with on the front end. There was some note that task members have reviewed the law for prescriptive versus discretionary language and identified where there is flexibility in the response, and that conversation will continue. We had a task force member share some thoughts about his views on public safety, given a lifetime of growing up and living and working in this area. A task force member expressed thanks to the community members for being part of this, and that we know that the meeting format isn't as optimal as if we were all in person, but we're trying to get as much as possible as we make these decisions. And then last but not least, it was emphasized that the report to the City Council will not be the end of the road, but the beginning of a road that will set a direction and influence spending decisions for years to come. So I was going to say, given that short overview, but I think that was actually a pretty comprehensive overview. Any of the other task force members who were on it, did I miss any highlights that would be helpful for your colleagues to hear? Or anything that I didn't characterize correctly? Or was that pretty comprehensive? Getting a thumbs up from Michael. Anyone else? Okay, perfect. So we will send around the link. So anyone who's got an extra hour and a half can put in an earbud and listen to all the feedbacks verbatim, but that'll give you a good overview of where that process went. There's a lot of additional opportunities for public feedback. There's going to be a business walk this Friday afternoon that our facilitators will talk through, that a number of you have already signed up for. We're working with a business liaison. We're going to walk through parts of Takoma Park and get feedback in that way. There's ongoing outreach happening to specific affinity groups and groups that speak other languages, including the deaf community. So all of that will continue to inform our work over this last month. But with that, Jevin, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Michael. And we are going to, from here, jump right into our subcommittee updates. We are going to start with subcommittee number 1, which is our Community Quality of Life subcommittee. And I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Scott to lead us through the subcommittee report out for this group.
All right, thanks, Jevin. So usually Sawa takes the baton and leads this, but she's not here today. So I will report out. Those who are part of our subcommittee, Christina Ajmel and who else was a part of us? Emil, sorry about that, Emil. Feel free to jump in and add anything I may have missed or provide your thoughts on what we discussed. So our subcommittee, we talked with Ms. Dara Baldwin for the majority. Actually went overtime in our conversation. Ms. Dara Baldwin participated in the last open session of the task force meeting, and she is with the Disability I'm sorry, she's with the Office of Disability Rights, but she made clear that her mantra is disability justice. And so we centered our conversation around that particular issue about disability rights, disability justice, and how that would play out within working towards improving safety in public safety in Takoma Park. Many of the questions that we talked about had to do with broadening the idea of what disability rights would be. I think we talk about it mainly under the mental health umbrella, but we also have disability rights can also include physical accessibility. So when we're talking about improving public safety, it's not only just a response team, which is high on our list of thinking about ways to address public safety, but also accessibility. So accessibility can include curb cuts, which are required under the ADA, ensuring that bike lanes are accessible, ensuring that ensure that individuals with disabilities have access to their businesses. So it's not only just a mental health aspect, but a broadening it up to include physical accessibility. We also talked a lot about when it comes to public safety, the data that's collected by the police force, and how we keep track of that, and how we can keep track of that, and that there are federal programs that are out there that will provide you money to keep track of data with respect to racial profiling, and so that Takoma Park should tap into that money because it is a good resource. It's a good fund that we could utilize to ensure to kind of keep tabs on what the Takoma Park Police Force is doing with respect to racial profiling and things of that nature. Those are all the main things that I have in my notes. If anyone else wants to jump in and add their perspective, feel free. And anything based on anything I may have missed, or any questions that were raised that Dara delved into.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ajamel or Emil, Chris, any other items that you all would like to touch upon or cover? Hearing none. Are there any questions for the Community Quality of Life Subcommittee? All righty. Well, thank you, Mr. Scott, for your report out. Appreciate you. We're going to, Jacqueline, next slide, please. We're going to head over to the Alternative Methods and Response Subcommittee. And Cordell, you are up, my friend.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm Cordell Carter from the Alternative Methods and Responses team. I'll be standing in for our lead, Cedric Boatman, tonight. The experts that we had last week were two folks that were quite familiar with what we're going through right now, because they were the co-chairs of the Montgomery Task Force that tackled this very same issue. We had Ms. Bernice Mariko North and Mark Maurer. And they were just a really robust discussion that went a little over, but that's because we were enjoying ourselves a bit much. But some of the highlights of that discussion included the following. This question is about how Montgomery County went about its work. And this kind of relates to the unique issue of Takoma Park, which is it's just a small municipality within a much larger one that borders a national capital. It's just so unique. There's no other precedent for it in the country. And so some of the issues that you're seeing in other cities, you don't necessarily see here. And so the question is, how do you right size reform here, considering that you don't have those other issues? And so that came up. Also looked at, recommendations for inclusion work that perhaps was not a part of the majority opinion. And so we were asking them, try to get a little deeper, tell us what wasn't in the report. Also, there was a fairly robust discussion about our school resource officers in public education. It just so happens that Mr. Boatman is the lead security officer for Montgomery Public Schools, as well as being a former law enforcement officer in Prince George's County. So he has a very unique view of law enforcement as, a member of that guild, if you will, and had a lot of questions about how we're dealing with young people and what that means when they leave the schoolhouse and are on the streets and how they're dealing with law enforcement officers. It was a lot of connections there, and probably for a different forum, we should definitely go deeper into that particular issue. And there was this question about community policing as well. And how the communities behave when police aren't there, perhaps non-armed law enforcement officers being more in use than not. And I think that's a good place to stop. I'll open up for Michael, Ruben, or Jide or Sadie if they had anything else from our fairly robust discussion last week.
I guess I did want to say, I thought that we'd also talked about the impact of within the school system, teachers and principals, the impact that they have on that kind of pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And while it didn't necessarily seem to be something that our committee would actively be taking up, and it may fall outside the scope of what Takoma Park itself can regulate, it did seem like it was something worth considering, since the introduction for a lot of kids of color into the kind of criminal justice system happens early on. And oftentimes it's something as simple as a misinterpretation of an action or what have you that leads the child to the principal, and things like that. So it would be good if that can be added to the list.
Right, and we have forwarded on a request to have some more information about district discipline policy, especially escalation of issues from the classroom to the principal's office, how that's impacting kids of color versus other children. Anyone else from the committee? Thank you, Jide. Anyone else from the committee? Well, great, thank you. I'll hand the floor back to Jevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Cordell. Appreciate you. Do we have any questions for the Alternative Methods community? Adam, please.
Yeah, I think we discussed early on in our task force meetings about the different kind of models for alternatives to responding to mental health crises and people who are struggling with drug addiction. I'm wondering if the subcommittee is moving toward a particular model, whether it's specially trained law enforcement officers or some kind of partnership with mental health experts, or whether it would be a standalone team like the Cahoots model. Have you guys kind of picked apart, which of those you think would best suit Takoma Park?
I'll speak for the committee here. We certainly have brought up this issue, especially 311 services. We do know that there's something in place right now in Takoma Park. We haven't had opportunity to go super deep into it, but it was offered to us last week by Chief Duvall, an opportunity to visit the dispatch center to see how the calls are coming in. What we're still looking for is some more disaggregated data about dispatch and dispatch policies that we expect it to be forthcoming.
Thank you, Cordell. Adam, does that answer your question?
Sure, it does. Thank you.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions for the Alternative Methods subcommittee? All right, hearing none. Jide, Sadie, and others. Michael, Cordell, thank you for your report out. Moving on to the Community Engagement and Transparency Subcommittee. Lauren, would you like to lead us through your committee's report out?
Sure. So we had a great discussion, and our subject matter experts were Donna Wright, who is a communications specialist for the City of Takoma Park, Andrew Powell, who is a deputy chief and internal affairs representative, Dan Frischkorn, who is a captain, and Jessica Clark, who joined us for a little bit, who's a deputy city manager. During our discussion, we talked about kind of prioritization and how the communications team, which is we learned was a team of one right now, kind of prioritizes communications and community contact, which we learned was a tough job for one person to do. Also, in that vein, the capacity to communicate so people can understand, which is kind of like language access as well as disability access. So there's some overlap there. When one of the other subcommittees talked a little bit more about disability access and accessibility as well. We talked a little bit about trainings beyond mental health. So kind of thinking about how we can reach people, who are hard of hearing, and other types of disabilities and beyond just mental health disabilities, and prepare people in the police department to interact with these individuals in a way that's helpful and useful. And we talked about how the police department handled 2 kind of problematic investigations and how the public was communicated with. And so that was a really robust conversation where we talked a lot to, I think Andrew Powell, who joined us, about kind of internal affairs and the process for internal affairs investigations that Takoma Park currently undergoes and uses. And also, to wrap it up, we talked about the complaint process and handling of officers who may have multiple complaints against them. And I don't think I mentioned, but my committee has Jumana, myself, Adam, and Kiminori. And so if any of you guys want to jump in and add anything that I may have missed, you're more than welcome to.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for your report out, Lauren. Deeply appreciate you. Are there any questions for the Community Transparency Committee? All right. Well, seeing none questions, we're going to turn it over to Jamal to introduce our subject matter experts this evening. Jamal.
Awesome. Thanks, Jevin. Thanks, team, for leading us through that report out. So now to get to the meat of this meeting and welcome our special guests. One, I apologize for being on video. My internet is very spotty, and being on video helps with better stability. But I want to introduce our first subject matter expert, and we'll get to hear from Delegate Moon. Delegate Moon was born in Takoma Park, Maryland. He currently represents District 20 in Montgomery County and serves on a number of committees, from the Judiciary Committee to the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, and also did some work within, played active role within some working groups within the State House, and really have done a lot to move forward some of the policies related to law enforcement body cameras and the State Commission, or criminal sentencing policy. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Delegate Moon to tell a bit about his work and the work that he's doing as it relates to reimagining public safety and kind of some of the new legislative updates, and then we'll hear from Ann.
Great. Thanks for having me, everyone. And, as always, I'm, of course, impressed that you guys are spending a Tuesday night talking policy shop, and apparently have been doing this on more than just tonight. So I appreciate it, not just because this is an important topic, but, the interest in policing, it's high now, and I hope it stays that way. But I would say it's not always been at the top of most people's minds. And oftentimes when it is, it's not in a useful way, if you know what I'm talking about. So let me just pause here and say, I was elected in 2014. So I got into the Maryland State House in 2015. And within a year, or my first year down there, we said, hey, can we do some of this policing stuff? Us young whippersnappers coming in, and we're pointing to some of the problems in other states. And they said, I swear to God, Democratic leadership, and I don't say this to demean them or somehow say, oh, how stupid or short-sighted they were, just to give you an honest sense of where the world was at in 2015. They literally said, no, this is not a thing that's happening in Maryland. This is a problem from other states. We don't need to have this kind of a headache here. So then Freddie Gray's spine is snapped. It's hitting the news the next year. And I said, hey, can we do something about this now? Now, you said it wasn't a Maryland problem. It's a Maryland problem. Look. And the response from at least one legislative leader at that time was, no, that's an outlier. Are you kidding me? Do you want to have a police riot in the streets. There was literally a quote, something like that, you know, and I guess they were thinking about the politics of offending the police union at that time. So that's after Freddie Gray's spine was snapped. And so within days, as we now know, the people would take to the streets, and a policy conversation then began. And I literally went back a third time and I said, we're going to do something about this now? And said, yeah, oh yeah, we're passing a bill. So we did pass a bill. We went through a whole work group process. I took a look at the thing after it was done, and in that era, it focused on the law enforcement Bill of Rights, and police had 10 days, 3 days, 5 days. They had a number of days before they could get interviewed after an incident, and little details like this became the topic of conversation. If you recall, if you were around thinking about this in that era, and we moved on, as I knew was going to happen. And I was never very satisfied with what we did then. A lot of it felt pretty cosmetic. So here we are, years later, it's 2021. We've had 6 years to process. I've had 6 years. I don't want to say to bide my time, because it's not like we weren't trying to get bills passed in the interim. We were. But finally, the wind was at our backs, and I really feel like we did something more substantial. It's not perfect, and as these things go, I could flag for everything we did. I could flag a hole in what we did that's going to require work and attention and implementation details. But I do want to just jog a little bit of a conversation about what we did, and let me just leave you with a little bit of framework here, because it's an important point here. But I have tried since those fumbled incidents and policy reform efforts in that 2015-2016 period, I became very aware of the fact that basically the way the system's set up is the state creates a minimum standard rule, and the counties can pretty much do whatever they want as long as they stay within the boundaries of those rules. So if you're a police reformer, care about police accountability, you want to make those state rules as detailed and as expansive as possible. And in the past era, they were pretty thin. And so much of the rules about use of force and things like that fall to local departments and local chiefs, and sometimes local chiefs bound by the agreements that they've locked their department into with the police union. So those are the layers of policy we're dealing with here. So for a city like Takoma Park, you got to think about it like that. There are state rules that require us to do certain things. There are probably union agreements that reduce our ability to do this, that, and the other. And then there's a whole layer of where the county is on top of the city in terms of what you all are allowed to do. So that all having been said, I hope you will chase every opportunity to push the city in a good direction where the gaps between state, county, and city lie, and to always understand that the state rules are a bare minimum of conduct. They're what we could get when you have to negotiate with Republicans from the Eastern Shore, Democrats from Baltimore City, Democrats from Potomac, and everything in between. And that's when you get these minimum state rules. And the city of Takoma Park and the county of Montgomery should always feel like they can and should do better than that which we had to negotiate with people with very different views and demography. Okay, so I'll just do a quick few bullets on some of the bills we passed. I'll drop you the links into the chat box so you can check out the summaries yourself. They are thick. We touched a million topics. Some of the big ones I will point you to. HB 670 was the speaker's bill And that's where new disciplinary procedures are created. And I just put the link into the chat there. This is the one that deals with what happens when someone has engaged in argued misconduct, and what's the investigation and disciplinary process look like for whether they get fired and things like that. This was hotly contested. It also does impact the city. Heads up, I think we doubled the amount of money a city has to pay in a lawsuit if there has been misconduct. So I'm not quite sure how Takoma Park is set up on this account, but I hope you feel that's the correct policy decision. We currently have a situation where people were having medical bills because of agreed to misconduct by the police, where the amount of compensation they could get was capped. And so there's a lot of injustices there. So that was HB 670. There's also a body cam, statewide body cam requirement for departments and a new use of force standard. This is going to be, and I'm popping that into the chat there too. That's SB 71. This was one of the most controversial things we did. The old force standard, if you know, the way I would read it in layperson's terms was, you can use the force that is reasonable to an objective officer. What's reasonable to the run-of-the-mill police officer? And we've changed that to say it's force that's necessary for what you're doing and proportional. So this is going to require retraining, and I think it's going to be, you know, litigated. I'm certain how we define this is going to be litigated over the years. But I hope what that means is our end goal here was to say force is basically, if it's going to be lethal force, it's got to be to protect life, right? That's proportionality in short. And so we started to change other things in that law, like no knock warrants, which you may have heard about, where police get a warrant to kick down someone's door and they don't have to give fair warning. We have deleted in Maryland that police can do that for destruction of evidence, that someone's life has to be at stake for you to use a dangerous tactic like that. It can't just be that property might be destroyed and things like that. So those are, I think, in my opinion, two of the biggest buckets of change. And the third is relating to police misconduct records and the Public Information Act. This one was frequently referred to as Anton's Law, SB 178. I dropped this in the chat also. And the top line here is that we have now changed policy going forward, that police discipline records and these misconduct files will be releasable under the Public Information Act, whereas a lot of this stuff was previously ruled by the court to be a personnel record, and personnel records under state law are not disclosable. So, and on top of that, we also said police departments can't destroy or expunge these records. It became a huge debate because the police were trying to get us to expel what they call unsustained records, under the theory that, well, I wasn't found guilty of this, why should that be discarded? But the public interest argument was, we have some cases where you have officers with multiple misconduct, dozens of misconduct allegations, every time found unfounded. For some of them, it was evidence planting. And you start to ask, well, come on, wait a second. This officer really is having false evidence planting accusations, about 3 a year. That seems unlikely. Maybe we want to take a closer look at that. So That's in a nutshell, I think, the biggest pieces we tackled, and I am happy to turn my microphone off, and I'm happy to answer any questions about those topics or some of the 15, 20 other police reform topics we dealt with this year that I didn't address.
All righty. Well, thank you, Delegate Moon, for your splendid overview. What we're going to do, so folks, please hold your questions, and we're going to have you go very quickly, and then we're going to do a panel style question and answer where folks can ask you all questions jointly. And so write your questions down. And Adam, you're going to be the first to go when we open back up. But Ann, you are up. We know that you represent the city of Takoma Park, and we're grateful for your time. And so go ahead. The floor is yours, madam.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here tonight. The lobbying firm I work with has represented the city of Takoma Park for a number of years. And I was happy to be the lead for the city's interest this year. And so you all are quite familiar with, I think, the official position of the city on several of these issues in terms of priorities. Along with the reforms that were very specific to the police that the General Assembly got through this session. And I think Delegate Moon did a fabulous job both in describing them. He also did a fabulous job being the floor leader in defending those bills under a great deal of attack. And, you know, I just the context to know that I think that the police reform issues were the number one, if you added up the time, the amount of time spent on any group of bills, there were probably 3-4 dozen bills that had been introduced. Everything was very controversial. And the bills that Delegate Moon, I don't know if it was all three or just two of the three, they were actually vetoed by Governor Hogan. But the timing of it worked so that the legislature could override those vetoes. That's how controversial they are. So none of this was easy. And of course, none of it went quite as far as some folks wanted it to go. So that's just the context. Some of the pieces of what passed will take effect this year. A lot of it won't take effect until 2022. So, you know, all of the change is not immediate. And obviously, when we're talking about this kind of, you know, reimagining of public safety, we are absolutely talking about philosophical changes, culture changes, that kind of thing. So all of this will take a lot of time to be implemented. The other pieces, though, that I just want to mention, because they both came up in the subcommittee summaries that you talked about. One is the crisis response related to people, especially people with behavioral health problems. And there, I think, is a growing recognition and a growing consensus that we need to do something other than having police respond when somebody's in that kind of crisis, because we have seen way too many times on camera how that ends up deadly. And so there were some bills to kind of chipping away at that idea that did not pass. And in the meantime, Baltimore City has decided that they will give 911 the ability to make a referral to a crisis response team instead of police response. So I think there's a lot that's going to be happening in the next few years around that kind of response. And I think that there's just a great deal of interest in how we are able to respond, whether it's somebody in a mental health crisis or in terms of responding to overdose situations. You know, when police respond to an overdose scene, they treat it as a crime scene instead of a public health scene, a health crisis. So that's going to be a big topic. And then the other thing is just related to the school resource officers. Obviously, Montgomery County's made a decision on that. There are there's I think a great deal of support to look at what the state response to that can be, because the data is so horrifying related to the impact of police presence in schools and the impact on children of color. So that's also going to be something. There were some bills in, none of them passed, but I think that's going to be an ongoing topic as well. Other than that, happy to be part of answering questions and engaging in any way you like.
Thank you, Anne. Appreciate your updates. And that leaves us with ample time for a dialogue back and forth. So appreciate you all. Adam, are you ready? We want to have you kick it off. And then folks, you can just raise your hand and we'll facilitate the question and answer.
Sure. So question for Delegate Moon about SB 178. My understanding of the MPIA when the new laws go into effect is that if someone files an MPIA request for one of these disciplinary records, the custodian of the records will have to turn it over. Is that right? And assuming that's right, my second question is, can the custodian of records, in this case, the police department or a town, just decide to make them public as a matter of public policy and transparency, or do they actually have to wait for a citizen to file an MPIA request for every document before they release it?
So all good questions. And I don't want to vouch for myself on this one 100%, but so no, I think it will be the case that you have to apply for it and it will be turned over with a but, and there's always a but here. Under the Public Information Act, there are existing exclusions and permitted denials and mandatory denials. And so, for example, if there's a pending investigation, you might get a denial on that. Other scenarios where there are victim privacy concerns or personal information, again, depending on the context, there's typically a public information custodian for government agencies that has to go through a list of these factors before they'll dump a file. So theoretically, you could set a policy where someone wanted to do something like that. For a government to do that in good conscience, I think you'd really want to understand the factors I just raised and sort of think through whether you think you can do a wholesale data dump and make sure you've screened out, the sort of problem cases. On the other end of this too, we keep having a bill come before us that attempts to pull body cams, for example, in a parallel conversation. Right now, they're sort of in with all of the government records, so all of the PIA exclusions and exclusions apply. And we started getting this year, for the first time, bills passing through that said things like, well, if it shows a officer death or a domestic violence victim or whatever, it was carving out a series of scenarios where they wanted the body cam footage to be excluded by law. So this is an ongoing debate. So you're right, we haven't sort of automated or done a mass data policy here, but we've at least begun the process of opening the door. Now, as someone speculated, what's to stop some good government group from coming in and wholesale requesting government records of the type you're talking about and doing something with them? You tell me.
Thank you, Delegate Moon. And anything to add to that? Wonderful. Adam, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Wonderful. Who's up next? Jemana, please.
Sorry, just put my camera on for a second. All right. Hi, and thank you for joining us tonight. We've got a lot of questions about, what happened in Annapolis this year. But this is a question, it's not exactly about Annapolis, but it's a conversation that we've been having internally where we were trying to figure out what is the discretion of a Tacoma Park Police Chief to say, we're just not doing these things. Like, where this is not our priority. My officers don't need to be pulling people over if they see that their taillight is out or, their tags have expired. Adam had actually looked up and found the Maryland statute. It said that you shall pull people over in these situations. There are other people who think that that's still, a suggestion, and that any police chief can prioritize how they want their officers patrolling. And so I didn't know if you had thoughts on that as we sort of think about what we can and can't get done in the context of this task force.
That's a great question. Well, I'll just tell my honest view on this. I mean, number one, look, you want to get into a lawyerly fight about whether officers must pull people over or something like that. We can have a lawyerly fight about that, and I don't know who's going to win. But I'll tell you, in the real world, yeah, of course, a chief can. I think they've got all sorts of discretion. I mean, the force policies, for example, like shooting at fleeing vehicles or stuff like this, de-escalation stuff. The county has had stuff like that. I mean, actually, if you just Google Montgomery County, Maryland use of force policy, or use of force directive, I forget what the term is. That stuff is online. I've looked it up at various points, and so that's when you realized, the county could have been doing all this sort of stuff, on its own the whole time Maryland was dithering, fighting with the Republicans about use of force policies. Yeah, 100%. The diversion stuff, cahoots or whatever. Yeah, like a lot of this has devolved to the counties, and the counties likewise the cities. Now, it's a little different with law enforcement, since the county police may serve specific functions that the city police do not. But in terms of enforcement priority, yeah, I think that's 100% true. I mean, just informally, I can tell you, municipal police departments during COVID were certainly using their discretion not to be hassling people for stupid stuff. Stupid, sorry, it's stupid to me sometimes, might not be stupid depending on the circumstance, but for minor
infractions.
Yeah, minor infractions. Local departments were already using their discretion in that manner, and I know that for a fact. I've been on calls with people where we've talked about this, so that's 100% possible. The call diversion, well, there's sort of layers of that. I don't know how the city's dispatch is set up, and whether you'd be referring people to county services versus the city having to have their own. But certainly there are pieces of this that the city can do. We tried, I think this actually didn't make it into the policing bill this year, but one of the things we tried to sneak in was a statewide analysis of 911 calls, just to get some baseline data and start to figure out which ones we could kick out, from sort of the routine older police response. So I don't know. Those are just a couple thoughts there.
Can I have a follow-up question? Yeah. So the other thing that when we talked to the chief, he talked to us about was, I know that small amounts of marijuana have been decriminalized, right, in Maryland, not legal. And the chief was saying that they still, because of however the state is set up, they have to write the ticket and then note it and do, go through whatever process. So it'd be sort of a similar question, is like, well, did you all touch on anything on that? Because I know there's a lot done, so I don't have a good sense of if that got touched on at all. But also, is that something that you see as potentially having leeway or any wiggle room in terms of how that gets encountered or doesn't get encountered?
I mean, look, I'm gonna just say yes on this one too. And I'll tell you, there's various lines here. There's the state's attorney, the elected prosecutor of each county, that can say whether they want to bring charges brought to them or not and proceed with things. And so, for example, in Montgomery County, our state's attorney has said he didn't do, I forget, you'll have to ask him the specifics, but I think in Montgomery County, he doesn't press marijuana possession or something like that. And in Baltimore, there's a whole range of cases they no longer do. Sex worker stuff, marijuana, I think a lot of the drug offenses they don't do. But that's at the prosecutor's level. Certainly, again, I think these types of decisions are already happening at various levels, from the officer you encounter on the street on the Ocean City Boardwalk, and whether they must take you in. I don't believe that. That's obviously not going on currently. So certainly there's a lot of room to do more there.
If I can just add a couple of pieces, there was another piece of legislation that also passed to expand the kinds of offenses that explicitly give police the ability to use their discretion, whether they will arrest or give a citation. So it doesn't get to the part about do they have to give the citation, but it does give them. So, for example, one of the items debated on the House floor was possession of a controlled dangerous substance other than marijuana. And yes, when this bill becomes effective, police will have greater discretion around that. So it's a little bit of a step. The other thing I want to mention, I don't know if you all are familiar with the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, the LEAD program. It's started as a pilot in Baltimore City. It's expanded to some other jurisdictions. And it is a really concentrated effort to have police specially trained to respond to folks. I think it's more on the substance use side rather than mental health, but it's a way where police are able maybe to develop more of a relationship, be with a social worker or other licensed clinician, and try to get people into treatment. And it's a pre-arrest attempt. So it's unlike jail diversion. This is arrest diversion, which cuts down on some of the collateral damage of an actual arrest. So that is something we can provide you all with more information. And of course, that's, these are the instances where law enforcement is involved, as opposed to law enforcement, having some things be appropriate for a response that isn't involving the police.
And sorry, can I just clarify one thing too?
Go right ahead.
So, it's an interesting, let me go back to the original question about officers using discretion to not bring people in on certain circumstances or try to get charge residents on certain offenses. Because of how long the policy apparatus takes to adjust, we want people to use good, sound discretion and not be causing problems and sticking their nose where they don't. But I have found that while many officers will do that, many, or at least some, will not, and they will fly in the face of the reforms you're trying to move. And so in almost every instance, I am now we're just trying to repeal laws on the books, and we've been slowly doing it. We had all gambling, including brackets, $1 brackets that some of you guys may have played, has been a criminal offense in Maryland. And the discretion, I'm going to be perfectly honest, look at where it's charged: Baltimore and Prince George's. I've never heard of a Montgomery County person being charged with this offense. So we just got rid of it. There are 7 or 8 different suspended driving license offenses, and you can get your license suspended for being late on child support, you didn't pay tickets, or registration fees, whatever, whole bunch of stuff. And that was the genesis of the Ferguson protests. And so I had done like 3 of these bills before, and I swear every time: possession of a suspended license, display of a suspended license, use of a suspended license, whatever. We keep missing little parts of the code where part of this remained as a crime. And if you thought the officers were using their discretion because they had gotten the message that we wanted them to stop charging the suspended license violations, well, I hate to tell you, you have to go through and delete them all out because they keep gravitating towards the alternate offenses. And that's the reality of it. So we push for the discretion and then we push to repeal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Moon. Thank you. And Jimena, did I answer your question?
Oh yeah,
Questions?
that's great.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, this is great. Y'all are just doing an incredible job. So thank you so much. Michael, I'm gonna turn the floor over to you.
Okay, just a couple of little things. Let's see. So Delegate Moon, thanks so much for joining us. One thing I was just wanting to ask you about is, do you think there'll be an opportunity next year to go after some parts of the Leobor replacement that still can override citizen involvement in the disciplinary process, like the trial board that only has one citizen member? That was one question. And then the other one is, what are some of the things that didn't get through this year that could impact our ability to implement changes in places like Takoma Park? Like, my understanding is we can't pull police out of traffic cameras just yet because it requires some state action in order to be able to do that. That didn't happen this year. So I'm wondering if there are any other things that, in your mind, would be nice to get for next time around, because I know we didn't get everything, even though we got a lot of improvements this year, and I'm very appreciative of all of those.
Yeah, these are good questions. We'll have to see. I think so. Let me step back for a second. There's a few layers of advocacy and sort of watchdogging that are going to be needed in the next few years. And there is a legislative basket. But let me park that for a second and just say, before we even get there, I do have a couple bits of concern that I think folks should just be aware of. One, the law we passed, HB 670, again, you have the link in the chat there somewhere. One of the things it does is it says, we're going to have a document be created, and it's called, I think it's something like the Uniform Discipline Matrix. And basically what it is this is the sentencing guidelines for administrative, like a workforce violation. So it'll say if an officer does X, and X might be racially profiles you, and they're actually they found that they did that. It's basically a statewide, what the sentence should be for that. That officer should be fired or lose a year of pay, or, this sort of thing. Never decertified and never again. There's a range of penalties that would be recommended. This document doesn't currently exist. It's going to be created by law now. And I think that document and what it says is of great public interest, because that's going to become ultimately what the penalties are for different issues in the state. Second, there will start to be, every county is going to start to appoint a police advisory board. I forget the exact name of it. And I think the way it is it's left to the counties how they fill this. But those people start to have the ability to appoint in a lot of the other players and make calls on some things going on, and they start to take police complaints in themselves. So I've been worried about what those are going to look like in non reform minded counties. And I'm also curious what they're going to look like in Montgomery. I don't have any clue actually who the county would appoint into such a body. So let me just say, I don't think we should ignore just those sort of setup aspects. On the other piece, I would say, I don't suspect we'll have a problem with this in Takoma Park or Montgomery County, but there's a few years delay, of a year or two delayed implementation. In some instances, like body cams, the body cam requirements start to roll in over time for counties. And what you don't want is local departments beginning to lock themselves into decisions before these new rules kick in, record destruction, or suddenly tie their hands in a new agreement on on something about body cams or something. I don't know. So there's all sorts of possibilities there. And then, of course, as you suggest, changes to the law that continue to need to be made. There are many. So the current process, there's a disciplinary process, as Michael Rubin has pointed to, and how it's set up, as I just noted, there's this statewide discipline, and then the counties have these boards that will start to administer that discipline. And then there's an appeals process. And we only got so far pushing all of this through towards the sort of justice perspective. So we're going to have to be back with bills. And this is why I sort of started this conversation by thanking everyone for being here on whatever Tuesday night after Memorial Day weekend to talk about this, months after the protests, because honestly, you know, and I know, if we don't have this energy, it's going to be very difficult to get a bill passed year over year, you know, right after we did it. And so to the extent we can sell things as bona fide, legitimate omissions, details that ought not have been forgotten, things like that, cleanup of the code, which we always do after these large bills, the easier ground we're on. And the more that we are in the territory of having a bona fide policy fight and a fight on the substance of things, well then we need the community might once again to come back with us next January so that we can overpower our opponents on this once again. So I'm just being blunt about, you know, how I see it, because again, I didn't tell you the story about the Freddie Gray era just for dramatic flourish. I think it's important to ground how we proceed with what happened in 2016, what happened this year, and just to sort of have, you know, some benchmarks for what this looks like.
Ooh, excuse me. Thank you, Delegate Moon. Michael, does that answer your question?
Sure. Do you want to say anything else about what didn't happen this year? Like in particular, I know there was some discussion about traffic enforcement and whether that can be moved out of police or not. And I know that didn't happen, so.
Oh, there's a ton. So here, let me rattle off the sort of things that didn't happen. So there was a county bill that sought to transfer control of the photo enforcement from the police to transportation authorities. And that got very heated and it died in the Senate. And that was a Montgomery County bill. But this topic keeps popping up. I think DC just did something similar to this, so that might keep interest in that going. There was a bill two or three bills to deal with police in schools. And likewise, I think so that was in Ways and Means. I don't know the exact details of what went down with those. But from what I can gather, there was wide variation between counties, county Democrats even, about how to proceed on this. And so Montgomery has more of a get the police out of schools membership, I think, than some of our other friends from other counties. So I don't know exactly how that'll shake out, but I suspect that means we have a Montgomery County only bill is one possibility. And so, you know, we don't like these to devolve into county by county fights, but that's sometimes what we do if we lose the statewide battle. There were also bills on whether officers should forfeit their pensions if they've been convicted of certain crimes. That was at various points in or out of the policing package, but ultimately got kicked out. Same on qualified immunity. And a lot of these actually were my colleague Janelle Wilkins in the House. She did a few of these bills. So I'm sure she'll be back with some of these. And we're waiting for the feds to make a move on the real move on qualified immunity. And without them doing it, the move in Maryland in bills has been to make the officers who engage in misconduct pay something. So the concept might be a little bit like an insurance deductible or something, that if the officer did X to you and X is wrong and it's misconduct, why should they pay zero and the taxpayers and residents of Takoma Park and the Takoma Park insurance policy pay for all of it? That's the basic direction that folks were trying to move in Maryland. So that's a few of them, but and I could go on and on. There are many of these types of issues, but I actually think we made a good case, and I'm going to say we're going to see some of these pass in the coming months and years.
Thank you, Delegate. And anything to add to that?
No, I like the idea of a Montgomery County bill on the SROs.
There you go. Michael, do you have any other comments, thoughts?
No, thank you both.
Wonderful, wonderful. Are there any other questions for the group? Jimena, you're up.
Okay, I'm not trying to like over ask, but if there are no other hands up, I have more questions. David, this does, I guess, come back to you. I have a couple questions. I know in the past, there's been some sort of bill proposals to look at certain types of police tech that I think have not gone. There was like one on stingrays. There was one looking sort of more generally at disclosure questions around police tech. I don't know that you all have done anything about biometrics, but having done the body camera bill, I haven't read it, so I don't know if the biometrics conversation came up. But I was wondering if any of that filtered into any of these bills, because I didn't follow them all, or if not, if there was any sort of efforts to put those in. And then I have another unrelated question after this one.
I'm glad you asked. This is a topic I've been interested in. And let me say a few things. We are so far from where we could be on police and law enforcement and surveillance technology. And the general mode of operating has been law enforcement is clearly, I'm terrible with phrases and idioms and things, but they're asking for forgiveness, not permission, as they say. And so with a lot of these new technologies, departments will acquire them, start using them, and you only find out far later that it's been going on, and then you try to challenge them. It takes years to unwind some of the tech through bills and the courts. So Takoma Park, I'll tell you, it's interesting. I think the counties and cities could proactively adopt policies restricting procurement, acquisition, use of certain technologies. Maryland has had bills on facial recognition. And just to give you a heads up on that, a lot of the algorithms are basically racist, and they confuse minorities for criminals at a far higher rate in database matches than white people. I'm just giving you a heads up on where this sort of use of this technology begins to go. And you could say, oh, well, whatever, we just won't charge them. It's like, okay, well, I don't really want to be stopped on the regular, because your robot and algorithm got it wrong. And we've been trying to get bills like this passed. And I say that partially in jest, but that's just one of many. We tried to also stop the business of fighting these pieces of technology one at a time. It was the pen register, the Stingray, the historical cell phone data. Oh, that's another one. They're going after all of our cell phone data also. That's a thing that's happening at the moment. And so we've tried to stop all of these things through one-by-one policies. And at one point, we tried to have a bill that said, no, wait a second. You've got to put all of these proposed technologies before this sort of like procurement or review board before you can deploy them. That did not go anywhere either. So this is a bit of whack-a-mole, and we're constantly behind because they get to spring these on us and we have to catch up later. But again, I feel pretty confident that a city or a county could has a pretty wide latitude to restrict what their department's acquiring.
So just to sort of follow up on the other question I had attached to that, And also to flag for you, it's not just like the Stingray, face recognition, other tech, but today there was a study about the tools that they use to download information off of digital devices and the biased way in which that gets searched and interpreted by the people doing the searching and charging. But when it came to the body camera bill, which I haven't read, I clicked on the link. Did it talk at all about biometric technologies in the use of body cameras, or was that not anywhere in the bill?
No. Let me tell you on body cams specifically. Body cams have mirrored the evolution of the recent police debate in Maryland perfectly. In the whole 2015, 2016 era, this would, I would think of this as like the Ferguson, Freddie Gray type of that was what people were thinking about. The body cam, we had bills in Maryland that were all over the place. Like we had a very long bill that said everything about what a body cam program needed to look like. And the one we passed was real simple. All it said was departments can have a body cam program and not be in violation of the state's wiretapping laws. And we'll sort of come up with some advisory rules. That's what we passed. And so now, I did manage to sneak into the body cam, a body cam provision into this year's rules. So I didn't know this, and I would put it to all of you to figure out what vendor, I forget who Takoma Park uses, but the county uses Axon, A-X-O-N.
So does Takoma Park, and so do most police departments.
There you go.
Takoma Park has to go with the county because the county is the one that does the prosecution, so they have to have conformity.
Okay. So here's a fun little game. Just Google the product manual for the Axon model used by the department, and you'll see some interesting things. So I met the Axon vendors at a conference one year and cornered them and asked them about this. This is how I figured out that the county was shorting their body cam standards. The body cams, just so you guys know how they're working, they're always recording. There's no such thing as the body cam's not really recording. When it's on and the officer's out in the field, the body cam's already recording. So when they hit the button, they're not telling it to record. They're telling it to save what has already been recorded. And so these things are running on a loop, constantly recording footage. And so I discovered that they're running around recording this loop, and Axon has settings: 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 120 seconds. And so after the Robert White shooting, I was like, well, wait a second. It would have been, sorry, this was a police shooting that happened in Silver Spring not too long ago. I said, well, it sure would have been nice to see that couple extra minutes of what was going through, what the officer was doing in the run up to the shooting. And it turns out that's a device setting on our counties and many counties body cams. It's set to 30 seconds. Who made that decision? I can't unwind it. I don't know where it came from. So I put in a bill with Senator Hedelman this year to say, no, it's got to be, let's do the max here, 2 minutes. Anyway, debate later. I think what got shunted into the bill is 60 seconds, something like that. So we doubled it from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. That's a minimum. So again, every department is happy to fight this out as they will to change that, but we've created a 60-second minimum in state law. And this is exactly what I mean about how these policies play out. And if you go through the rest of the Axon manual, you'll see other things. Our body cams only record video. They don't record audio. That's just you flip a switch though, and they could record audio. Not quite, because we have wiretap laws in Maryland, so you gotta think about that aspect of it. But my point is, all of these things are changing. Auto-activating body cams is a new feature on the Axons, where anytime a gun is unholstered, it starts recording, and you don't have to leave it to the officer's discretion or accident about recording or unrecording things. right? So all of these things are within the realm of possibility. And the reason why I insisted on putting this into state law was just so that people would see that these are device features, and they will start creating new laws based on the device features. I swear to God, that's I was like, let's just put some number in there so that people see that this is one of the variables on the body cams. But there are many others we tried to stick in there, and it didn't fly this year. So it's sort of just scratching the tip of the iceberg there. The other thing, I actually do like when people aware of these things, is that section of law is unpreemptible. So we actually said counties can't do weird things to get out from under it. So the body cam requirement plus 60 seconds is a unpreemptible section of state code about body cam policy that I hope one day fills in with additional detail.
Can I ask my unrelated question, or is there other questions? Go ahead. Okay, so that is totally different topic, but on the question of, in particular, drug encounters, I don't know enough about Maryland law for you guys touch this at all. I know you talked about there's obviously discretion in terms of do you give a citation, or arrest or something else, but is there anything that prevents states or localities from doing needle exchange? I think it gets dicier if you talk about sort of safe use spaces. Is that anything that's been in the discussion? And if so, are there parameters around that we should know about?
So I think it's pretty pathetic that Montgomery County doesn't have a needle exchange program. You got to register with the state. I'm pretty sure Montgomery doesn't have one. I think there's one in Baltimore. I don't think there's one in Frederick. I have to double check whether a city within a county can do it or whether they have to do it with the county. But I'm fairly certain we don't have anything like that here. Likewise, when I came in, we were in 2015 or 16, I forget what year, they were passing bills like Good Samaritan bills to stop the police from charging people after an overdose or something like that, right? You don't want to discourage people from calling for help when there's an overdose going on, was the concept. And we kept having to tweak the law because it kept happening. And so this year, again, this is my whole thing about, well, sometimes you just have to delete the law. We finally passed a bill to remove criminal penalties on syringe possession. And it has everything to do with the fact that most counties have not adopted the on the books method of doing a licensed needle exchange program. And so all of this is informal and people are engaging in dangerous practices, and the police are continuing to charge people. The penalty for syringe possession in Maryland is 4 years. And so you better believe people are dumping them on the street. If an officer says, hey, do you have anything on you? I don't want to get pricked. They might not want to say yes because it's 4 years. So here we are. So I'm glad you asked this question because it's very unpopular. Hogan just vetoed this. I put this bill in with Senator Carter this year, and Hogan just vetoed it last week. So I guess there are folks that continue to stigmatize that whole conversation in unhelpful ways and keep steering us towards the criminalization direction. So yeah, anything you can do at the city level to get that going, especially the things that might require a licensed program into existence, would be interesting.
I did put in the chat a link to a report from the State Health Department on where the syringe service programs exist. And so it might be more than you were aware of, Delegate Moon, but you were correct that Montgomery County does not have one. We'd have to go through them. We can look through to see if it's a good question. Does it have to be county, or can a city apply? So we can look at that information there. I do also just quickly, first of all, say thank you, Delegate Moon, for sponsoring that legislation. And we are going to be talking soon about the override campaign. But the other question you asked was about, safe injection spaces, overdose prevention sites. I believe that the attempt right now is going to be, because there's no way Governor Hogan is going to support it. He's been very clear on multiple occasions. He does not support safe injection sites. And so there's a lot of support in the city. So there was legislation. There's been legislation now for 5 years, I think, simply to allow, much like the syringe services programs, to allow local jurisdictions to create such programs. And it keeps not getting voted on. So, but the Baltimore City mayor testified in support of the bill in the House and the Senate this year. So I think there may be some attempts to see if from a local level, some resolution or something might be able to be passed in support of that statewide measure. And that may be something else for Montgomery County, or for the city of Takoma Park to recommend to Montgomery County but that has to be a state law that addresses all the paraphernalia and the possession issues. So a local jurisdiction couldn't do it on its own, but a local could in some way make it clear that they support that effort.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Delegate Moon. Thank you, Ann. So here's what we're going to do, Dwayne. We're going to ask your question. We're coming right up on the wall here. Ann and Delegate Moon, if we can answer quickly, and then I have a closing question for you all for the task force. So Dwayne, you're up.
All right, thanks, Kevin. My question really, not sure if it's going to be able to be answered quickly, but here you go. If you're aware of, Delegate Moon and Council Member, whether there are reentry programs available in either, but what reentry programs are available in Montgomery County and by extension Takoma Park. It's not an issue that we have talked about extensively here, but I think it relates to public safety and ensuring that those who are returning back into our community from being incarcerated have viable ways to re-enter into society and continue and move back into living productively. So I was just curious with respect to Montgomery County and, like I said, Takoma Park by extension, whether there are what programs are available, if you are aware of them. Thanks.
I am not aware of specific programs. I am 100% certain that there are some programs in Montgomery County, and I'm happy to help do some of the research to figure that out.
Yeah, and there are on the private side or the nonprofit side, there are definitely groups, Eddie Ellis, Jeffrey Thames, and our council member Terry Siemens, my city council member, works with some of these groups too. But I'll bring it back to the larger policy framework here, which I will just, and maybe this is a good point to end. There's just a lot of underfunding of this entire area. We just got back, for example, the women's facility was axed, and so women's reentry services in the state were sort of just merged in somewhere with men's programs here and there where there used to be a dedicated facility. And we started to get that back on the track at a pretty large price tag, but I thought it was important. And so as we looked down the road, I started to look with some of my colleagues at things like the marijuana revenue seems like that's going to happen. And if we don't hijack some revenue source like that and start to dedicate some of it for these purposes, I'm beginning to think it's never going to happen. So that's my other pitch on this is that I think we've got a ready related revenue source to sort of unravel some of these drug war and other public health failings and to the resources towards reentry. So I think that's going to be where we might be most likely to get it.
Thank you,
Thank you both.
Thank you. Dwayne, does that answer your question? And
sort of, I mean, it just in my mind means it's something else that we need to explore a little bit more. I mean, funding is absolutely a huge portion of every issue that we are talking about, which, you know, Delegate Moon just outlined. But I think our group, that's one issue that came up into my mind as everyone was speaking, and something that needs to be explored a little bit more about, including that issue within in how we are thinking about transforming and reimagining public safety here in Takoma Park.
Kim and Nori, really quickly before we close up, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any sort of specific reentry programs per se, but I'm pretty sure there are sort of community-based organizations that support successful reintegration. One thing to notice is that I think, you know, within the Montgomery County, there's a sort of county jails, and there's like reentry that happens from, you know, coming back from the jails. But when you talk about sort of like prisoners, they're all coming from, well, there's the federal, but they're mostly from state facilities. So, you know, there might be a sort of like a, you know, reentry programs and services that are organized by State Department of Public Safety. You know, at least just that's how the sort of system works.
Alrighty. Thank you, Kim and Nori, for your thoughts. As we close out today, Delegate Moon, and I have one question for you for the task force at large. We have 4 weeks left to write the report. And from your vantage point, from your viewpoint, if you had one specific piece of advice for the task force as we continue and engage over the next 4 weeks, what would you leave us with? Anne, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think as you've heard, the subconsciously, subliminally from Delegate Moon, the change is incremental, and you know, and you build on the policy changes that you can get through. We're coming up on a statewide election year next year, and you know, certainly there are opportunities with every 4-year term. So it's not to, you know, say, oh, you know, just set your expectations low. It is about recognizing that you have to do that building, you know, and to realize that City of Takoma Park can be a real leader in how you approach all of this, and really, you know, be a model for other cities and counties to be able to replicate. So definitely shoot high, aim high. But you know, just understand how some of this process works.
I'll just sort of redouble on some of the themes from tonight, which are that the city really the cities and counties can really should feel invited to step into the breach and to expand upon some of the conversations we had at the state level, but were unable to get as far as we wanted. It's true that, you know, in these between periods, it can be incremental, especially at the state level. But again, the county, the city have so much room to fill in those gaps, I think, in the conversation in those intervening periods. And so it's incremental, but it's punctuated by large bursts of activity where we get as much done as we can. And hopefully we're actually not done with this period yet. And we can come back and ramp through some of the fixes that got left off of the package this year. But again, it'll require folks to show up. So again, thanks for showing up on Tuesday, and I hope you'll show up in January.
Thank you all. Before we log off tonight, Kim and Nori, I see your hand is still up. Do you have any other comments or questions to add? All righty. Well, thank you all for your time, Delegate Moon, and thank you so much for your comments and your session tonight. We deeply appreciate your time and commitment that you've dedicated to us. Task Force, we'll see you here in 1 week, June 8th, at the same place at the same time. So let's
I wanted to, Jevin, before we close out, wanted to just send a reminder to folks for this Friday. if you're available to attend the business walk that Jessica sent around. So I know some of us have already RSVP'd. So if you all can attend that business walk and engage with business owners about the task force and get some feedback from them this Friday at 2 o'clock. We'll also send around more details. Please RSVP.
Yep.
Sorry, Jevin, but back to you.
You're fine. Also, that reminds me to also include a note about ride-alongs. The chief and police department extended that opportunity to the task force. So if you're interested in partaking in a ride-along with the Tacoma Park Police Force, please send us a note or follow up to our emails that we'll send out to you if that's something that you're interested in. So sign up for the business walk. If you can make it on Friday, sign up for a ride along if you're so inclined to do so. And we'll see you here 5:30 sharp next Tuesday, June 8th. Have a great one, everybody. Be safe.